The United Kingdom, a country of 62 million people, one of the really big players in the European community for the last nearly 4 decades, found herself hopelessly isolated, abused by everybody, and I don't think there is any going back from that. Cameron is somebody who is naturally a very gentle consensus politician. He likes to be popular, he likes to sign up to agreements. He went along last Thursday with what he thought were very reasonable, practical demands so that the United Kingdom, which has a very big financial services industry, could get some degree of protection for that industry. And he went into those negotiations assuming that he'd get what he asked for. What he was confronted by was a snarling, aggressive French president in Sarkozy, who just said, we will not bend, we will not yield in any way, and we insist that the financial transaction tax stays. Now, what that would have meant is a new tax, 80% of which would have been paid by the UK. If Cameron had signed up to that and gone back to the House of Commons, it literally would have brought down the British government, and so he was forced into a position where he simply had to say no. I've tried to argue over many, many years that either you're fully in the EU or you're fully out of the EU. And the compromise over that period of time is people have liked to believe that we can be in Europe but not run by Europe. I think that myth died in those early hours of Friday morning, because we now find ourselves in a position where we're outvoted by 26-1. We're in a hopeless minority, and yet we still have 75% of our laws that run the United Kingdom made in these institutions. And in particular, the industry that Cameron sought to protect, our financial services, are now more vulnerable than ever. So I think that Cameron, not wishing to do this, has now opened up the real debate in the UK about our European future. And I suspect that over the coming months, the calls for Britain to have a referendum on our continued membership of the Union will become very loud and very strong indeed. Put yourself in the place of a Greek right now. Whether you vote at the next general election for a socialist party or a conservative party or a liberal party for that matter, it makes no difference, because your tax rates, your spending rates, all of these things are now determined by 3 foreign officials, one from the European Commission, one from the European Central Bank, and one from the IMF, who I'm afraid have turned into an organisation who exists to back up this Euro project. If you cannot change your destiny or your future by the way you vote, you are trapped inside something that is now forcing upon you austerity measures, massive cuts in public spending, without the compensation of a currency that can devalue because your economy is not doing very well. I think my definition of an economic prison is pretty accurate. Don't forget that politicians will always defend the status quo. They will always tell you that if what we have now doesn't continue to exist, the sky will fall in, there'll be famine, floods, pestilence, and it'll all be a complete disaster. We've seen this before many times over the years. The reality is that the breakdown of the euro in the short term would be tough, because many, many European banks would go bust and probably have to be nationalised. But as we've seen with Iceland, who back in 2008 let some of their banks go bust, accepted the situation, 3 years on, they're going back to growth. I think the biggest threat we face now in Europe is to keep countries like Greece and Portugal and Ireland, and possibly even Spain and Italy too, trapped inside an economic prison, stripped of their democracy. I mean, literally, the governments of Greece and Italy were removed by these bully boys in Brussels. The bigger threat is they stay inside this thing and they die a slow economic death, and they finish up with unemployment figures that are so high that there is even a risk that Europe returns to extremism and maybe even fascism. So let's get the bad news out of the way, let's have the breakdown, and you know what? A few months on, the world will seem very much rosier.